Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us at the 12th edition of the Spain Investors Day. We welcome you on behalf of Estudio de Comunicación, our partners BNP Paribas and BNP Paribas Exane, our sponsors Endesa, Deloitte, CaixaBank, Prisa, BME, AON, and our collaborators Equipo Económico, Linklaters, ECEX, ICO, and Cofides. We especially welcome the first Vice President and Minister for the Economy and Digital Transformation, Nadia Calviño. I now give the floor to the Managing Director and future President of Deloitte, Mr. Héctor Flórez.
Vice President, authorities, distinguished guests, I would firstly like to thank Spain Investor Day for the opportunity to be part of this event, which has become an essential point of reference for many investors worldwide. It's a great honor for Deloitte to be able to introduce our Vice President and Minister for Economy and Digital Transformation, Ms. Nadia Calviño. Our Vice President's track record, with which we are all familiar, is surely the best guarantee for investors and for European and international institutions that Spain is firmly committed to sustainable development from three perspectives: financial, social, and environmental. Her recent appointment as chair of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the International Monetary Fund is evidence of her prestige globally. Nadia Calviño is currently setting the stage for the solid recovery of the Spanish economy after the health crisis that has been shaking the world for the last 2 years. In this regard, as you know, due to its significant exposure to sectors highly dependent on mobility, Spain's economy has been one of the hardest hit in Europe. However, 2 years later the start of the pandemic, it seems to me that we have the opportunity to regain our position as one of the global leaders in growth in Europe. In addition to the undeniable recovery which is already underway, the next generation EU funds enable us to address the transformation the economy needs to boost productivity and build an economic model less sensitive to crisis. We are already starting to lay the foundations to overcome historical imbalances in terms of employment, deficits, and debt, and must now go one step further and take advantage of the recovery and the EU funds to initiate a transformation that, in my opinion, has to aim the industrialization of Spain, reindustrialization of Spain, and making our country the best country to work in and to invest in, not just to live in. To facilitate the implementation of this transformation process and to ensure that the investments and reforms we are making have the desired multiplier effect on private investment, it's important for all stakeholders involved to join forces to continue to create a favorable and stable climate for investment. And of course, we must also rely on the leading companies we have across sectors that are fully committed to contributing to this transformation process. Many of you are here today. All in all, the points I've raised are merely a few reflections based on our desire to help improve our country with a view to leaving a better legacy for future generations. I think that's our responsibility, our common responsibility. Along with the conviction that our Vice President is the right person to lead us through this journey, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Ms. Nadia Calviño. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today and to participate once more in this top-level event that marks, to some extent, the beginning of the year in my area of responsibility and provides a very good opportunity to share with you all, those present here today, those that are following us through the screens, streaming, to share with you the economic outlook, the priorities for 2022, also to make the balance of what has happened in the last 12 months. 1 year ago, I highlighted 3 priorities that, when I look back, have actually been leading our action during 2021. First, effective pandemic response to this pandemic. Secondly, preserving financial stability. And thirdly, good implementation of the investment and reform recovery plan, this next generation EU plan that has just been mentioned already. 1 year later, I'm very happy to say that we have made significant progress in all 3 of them. First, regarding the response to the pandemic. Vaccines have certainly marked a turning point. More than 92% of the Spanish population over 12 years of age is fully vaccinated. We're currently in the middle of the Omicron wave, which of course adds an element of additional uncertainty on the short term. But we clearly see we are living a very different scenario from previous years, and all indicators show an economic recovery that accelerated in the second part of 2021. Beyond action on the health front, we have maintained and adjusted the unprecedented support measures deployed since March 2020 to protect the economic tissue, to protect employment and household income. And this broad array of instruments, from furlough schemes to public guarantees, from company solvency direct support to aid to self-employed workers, and a social protection shield for the most vulnerable part of our society. All these instruments have undoubtedly been essential to reduce the impact of the pandemic and preserve the basis for a strong recovery. With more than 135 billion euros mobilized in credit to companies, and the president of the National Development Bank, the ICO, is here today, and I want to really pay tribute to the excellent work that they have been doing to ensure this mobilization of credit to the real economy. With more than 3.5 million workers covered by short-term work schemes in the worst moments of the pandemic, this new instrument known as ERTE, which has been essential to preserve employment in our country. Most of these workers, the vast majority of these workers, have already been swiftly reintegrated to their jobs, with the number of people covered by ERTEs remaining stable in the wake of this new wave of the Omicron variant of the pandemic. With all these instruments, the Spanish economy, I think, has been preserved and protected by some of the most effective actions on the economic and social front. And this allows us to foresee a very different exit to this crisis compared to the past. Secondly, with regards to the protection of financial stability, the economic recovery gained traction in the course of 2021, and the outlook is also positive for 2022. All analysts and public institutions expect Spain to be one of the engines of growth in Europe in the coming months. And 2 features of this recovery are worth mentioning. On the one hand, the outstanding dynamism of the labour market, with all employment indicators and metrics not only recovering, but even improving pre-pandemic levels in 15 months' time, as compared to the more than 12 years that it took to recover the levels of employment and unemployment rates after the past financial crisis. On the other hand, tax revenues have outperformed all expectations, closing 2021 more than 4% above pre-pandemic levels and well above the underlying projections to the 2021 budget. In addition, Spain has been experiencing favorable conditions of access to financial markets that altogether, with the good performance of tax revenues, transfers of Next Generation EU funds, all of this has allowed for a reduction of 25% in the planned public debt issuance in the course of 2021. So thanks to the confidence of international investors, many of which are following us today, the average funding cost of new issuance was negative for the first time in history at minus 0.04%. More than 60% of transactions were issued at negative rates, and this has allowed for a reduction of the average cost of debt outstanding to 1.64% of GDP. And this reduction of financial cost has been compatible with an increase and extension of the average maturity of Spanish debt beyond 8 years. Obviously, this has reinforced medium and long-term financial sustainability, and as interest payments on outstanding debt will continue to fall even in a scenario of change of monetary policy. Conversely to other countries, deficit and debt to GDP ratios already resumed last year the downward trend that was interrupted due to the extraordinary response to the pandemic, and we will continue on that path. Actually, we announced the Treasury Programme for 2022 this very week, and we announced a 10% reduction of total debt issuance and a stabilization of net issuance at 75 billion euros in the course of this year. Thirdly, moving to the effective implementation of the recovery plan. Spain is leading the deployment of the Next Generation EU recovery plan with very good progress in 2021. On the European front, we have been working very hard. The National Recovery Plan was formally approved in July of last year. The disbursement of the pre-financing took place in August, and the first milestone-linked disbursement of euro 10 billion in December last year. In parallel to the intense work with the European institutions, back home we pressed with the preparatory work in the first semester of last year so as to accelerate the execution of investment in the second part of the year. We have swiftly deployed investments in 2021, and the remaining budgetary appropriations will be transferred to the 2022 budget so that 100% of investments planned with EU funds is executed and we mobilize private investments. Moreover, we have already launched 3 strategic projects, so-called PERTEs, with maximum impact on future potential growth, employment, and competitiveness of the Spanish economy, with a high component of public-private partnership. The strategic project for the electric and connected vehicle, also known as the PERTE VEC, whose governing rules for the close to 4 billion euros in public investment. These governing rules have already been published right after the authorization by the European Commission last December, and we hope to launch the call for the support in the coming weeks. The PERTE for Vanguard Health, approved by the Council of Ministers on November 30th, 2021, has already committed close to 70 million euros in grants for investment. And the strategic project for renewable hydrogen and energy storage, of which I am sure the third Vice President Teresa Rivera spoke yesterday, also known as PERTE ERA, has already launched 4 calls for projects. They have been published, and we hope to mobilize the investment in the coming months. In addition, 4 other PERTEs, 4 other strategic projects have been announced in the areas of the new language economy, the agri-food sector, the aerospace industry, and the new care economy. Now, besides investments, which are very heavily front-loaded in the case of the Spanish Recovery Plan, our program also includes very ambitious reforms. Progress made on the structural reform front during 2021 is really impressive. We reached all planned milestones and targets, including the labour market reform, which was implemented in the last government meeting in December and is absolutely key for many reasons. First of all, the legal text is the outcome of a long and intense negotiation with social partners that led to a balanced tripartite agreement just before Christmas between the government, workers' unions, and business associations. Secondly, the reform responds to recommendations that international institutions have been making to Spain for years. It targets the reduction of the striking share of temporary contracts prevailing in our country, which is 10 points higher than the EU average, and a source of precariousness, low productivity, and low investment in human capital. The reform also rebalances collective bargaining whilst reinforcing internal flexibility of companies, including through new tools based on the positive experience of furlough schemes during the pandemic, to avoid the intense job volatility and so economic volatility, and intensifying the focus on training and retraining of workers in case of significant cyclical downturns or structural changes. And finally, I'd like to also stress that it is a balanced and forward-looking reform that aims at ensuring high-quality job creation in the economic cycle now starting, in particular in the areas of the new green and digital economy that have just been mentioned by Victor. Besides the labour market reform, which we hope to get approved by the Parliament in the first days of February, other important laws were passed last year to reinforce the public pension system, to modernise education and drive the climate transition. And moreover, the government also sent to Parliament a set of laws that should finish the legislative process in the first part of the current year to improve business climate and attract investment, including the law Crea y Crece, which aims at boosting company creation and growth, the Startups Law, to make Spain one of the leading countries to support innovative and fast-growing companies, attracting investment and talent to the new digital economy through significant tax incentives, streamlined procedures, and a special visa regime for digital nomads. And the draft bankruptcy law reform to align the Spanish framework to those facilitating the early restructuring of viable companies with debt restructuring, fast-track processes, particularly for micro-enterprises. Looking ahead, let me conclude with 5 key reflections of a more general nature. First, for the past 3.5 years, we have followed a clear and coherent economic policy based on 3 axes: fiscal responsibility, social justice, and forward-looking structural reforms. And these principles will continue to guide us in the coming months and years. Secondly, measures adopted to respond to the pandemic have been very effective to allow for a strong recovery in record time, as shown in particular by the job market. Nevertheless, there are still important uncertainties linked to the pandemic, supply-side bottlenecks, and geopolitical and financial factors that should not be neglected. I am sure that they have been widely discussed here. Moreover, high prices in international energy markets are a source of concern. Together with the base effect, energy prices are the key factor driving general prices up, and we should do our utmost to address this in the course of the year. In this context, thirdly, it is important to avoid a premature removal of accommodative monetary and fiscal policies. Supporting the economic recovery and job creation is priority number 1 on our economic policy agenda. The past 2 years have confirmed that the public sector is key, that we need to protect our welfare state and reinforce our resilience to face current and future challenges, starting with investment in health and education. And this is important. Fourthly, we have met our fiscal targets in terms of deficit and debt to GDP reduction in 2021, and strong growth will enable fiscal consolidation whilst maintaining a high level of investment. The outlook is one of reinforced long-term fiscal sustainability, even if in a different monetary policy context. Conversely to the investment gap caused by the financial crisis that started in 2008, which has been dragging growth in Spain for a decade, frankly, this time we have the Next Generation EU funds and the recovery plan, so as to be able to undertake the extraordinary investment effort needed to drive the twin green and digital transitions and reinforce also our social infrastructures. And these should be an essential element of any forward-looking fiscal policy framework: the need to preserve essential future-proof investments if we want to ensure sustainable growth from the economic and financial point of view, but also from the social and environmental point of view. And I'm very happy that this tripartite, description of our objectives has really sunk, and everybody understands that these three perspectives on sustainability are really should go together when we are designing our economic policy going forward. Finally, our ambitious investment and reform recovery plan will reach cruising speed in 2022. And this should not only create to closing the gap created by the pandemic, but also increase long-term potential growth through higher human, technological and natural capital and increased productivity. The aim is to mobilize up to 500 billion euros in private investment by 2026, so we really have no time to lose. The stakes and challenges are high, but so is our determination to continue to face them in a decisive manner, in an effective manner, counting on the strong interest and confidence of international investors present here today that have repeatedly shown their commitment to Spain. So let me close on this note, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, and a Happy New Year.
Thank you very much, Vice President. We are now opening the turn for questions from international investors. We're going to start with one that has been raised frequently both yesterday and today. It goes like this. In 2021, Spain passed a law that forced investors to get the government's approval when acquiring Spanish companies. For how long is this law going to be enforced? Don't you think it generates uncertainty from investors involved in M&A?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Actually, this is, I think, a very appropriate forum to express and to share the experience we've had with this. Well, Spain is a country that welcomes foreign investment. Let me be very straightforward and clear on this. Foreign investment has been key for the development of our country, for our financial stability, also for the industrial process throughout our whole democratic period, and we welcome foreign investment. At the same time, we need to make sure that we ensure stability and protect strategic interests in the country, as many other countries are doing. I think that the existence of this kind of processes is not unique. Quite on the contrary, most European countries have some sort of filter or process to try to ensure that we protect the essential interest, the public interest in strategic sectors. I think our law in this, from this point of view is very balanced. My experience is that we have been swiftly approving non-problematic investments, that this has not at all hindered foreign investment in our country. And at the same time, we have been able to have good discussions and to reach a balanced outcome in those areas or those operations that may have been more sensitive or challenge our public interest in those strategic sectors. So all in all, I do not think that this should create any uncertainty or legal doubts. Quite on the contrary, I think that companies that have been confronted with the process must appreciate that there is a very clear process, that it has been swiftly conducted, and a very transparent and fair approach on the side of the government that needs to protect the Spanish public interest as all other countries around us are doing.
Thank you very much. The government has managed to agree with the company's representatives a labor reform that still needs to be approved by Congress. Is the government open to introduce changes in this new law from other political parties to get the final approval in Congress?
2 points on this. As I already mentioned in my introductory remarks, the labor market reform is a key reform, and I think it is particularly valuable because it responds to the repeated recommendations of international institutions for many years, It also responds to the expectations and ambitions of Spanish citizens and workers to improve the quality of the jobs that will be created in this new economic cycle that is now starting. And it is also particularly valuable because of the public support, the social legitimacy that is represented by the fact that it is the result of a long and intense negotiation with the social partners and an agreement that was reached just before Christmas, a tripartite agreement. And this is very different to previous reforms that had been unilaterally implemented by the government without having this very strong social support by partners, not only the workers' unions, but also business representatives. I think it is very good that we have a law in place because that provides legal certainty to investors, to companies, and it provides a good framework for the job creation in this new expansionary phase. That is why I really hope that the law is supported and approved by the Parliament in the first days of February, and I would hope without any change, because all words and commas have been the result of very intense and long-lasting negotiations, and the law represents a delicate balance that should be upheld and preserved in the legislative process.
Okay, next one goes like this. High energy prices are impacting both households and companies. Is the government going to intervene in this matter to impose utilities a maximum price?
Well, energy prices are a source of concern. I already mentioned it in my remarks. I think actually it is one of the key elements of instability that are relevant in the outlook for 2022. The Spanish government was probably the first one to raise this as a very significant issue in the international sphere. I mentioned this as a key factor to work on in the ECOFIN ministers meeting. President Sanchez has been bringing it up in the European leaders meetings. I have also mentioned it in G20 and international fora. Vice President Rivera has been working very hard with her peers at the international and European level to try to ensure that our regulatory framework is fit for purpose. We have a framework which has been set in a specific circumstance that was before or pre the Paris Agreement, pre the important and ambitious green transition plans that we are implemented. Now, Spain is very committed to this green transition. Many of the Spanish energy companies are represented here today. We've been working intensely with them to try to devise an ambitious but also reasonable and balanced transition plan that would ensure that we reach our milestones and targets by 2030 and by 2050. And frankly, this is all about economic sustainability. It is all about future generations, as was mentioned here today. We need to make sure that we leave a better world for future generations, more sustainable from the economic and financial, from the social and from the environmental point of view. And that forces us to be serious about this transition. Now, high energy prices change the parameters on which these plans have been made. And I think this should prompt a reflection on our regulatory framework. And that is what we have been calling for, which obviously exceeds the capacity of a national government, because we are talking about the evolution of gas prices in international markets. And this is an issue that should be tackled at the very least, at the minimum, at the European level. So we will continue to work very hard, not only responding in a decisive manner at the national level, trying to protect the most vulnerable and to ensure the better possible functioning of our markets and trying to minimize the negative impact of these high international prices on citizens, on families, on the competitiveness of our companies, and also continue to work very hard with our peers, starting in Europe, to try to provide an effective response at the European and international level to what is obviously an international challenge.
Thank you very much. And the last one. A year ago in this same forum, you were optimistic about Spain's economic evolution for 2021, giving a 7% GDP growth forecast. Spain will end this year with a GDP growth of just under 5%. due to the uncertainty generated by the pandemic, mainly, how optimistic are you in your forecast for this year's economy and why?
Well, what we have seen in the last 2 years is unprecedented volatility in terms of economic forecasting. If economic forecasting is normally a difficult exercise, it becomes extremely difficult when we are surrounded by so many uncertainties over which we have little control. Obviously, as I said in my introductory remarks, the vaccination process has marked a turning point, and luckily, with more than 90% of the population in Spain vaccinated, the approach we have to the pandemic is very different to the one of past years, and also extremely different to those of other countries, which maybe have a low vaccination rate and may be more impacted by this Omicron variant. But obviously, the health situation is imposing on us to be twice as prudent as always in terms of not only our macroeconomic work, but more importantly, our economic policy decisions. And that is what drove us last year to be particularly prudent when designing our budget for 2021, so that even in a less positive macroeconomic scenario, we will be meeting our targets in terms of deficit reduction. As I said in my remarks, tax receipts, tax revenues have exceeded pre-pandemic levels and are clearly above the forecast that underlied the budget projections and the budget preparation, and that makes it, even more certain that we will be meeting our target. We have been just as prudent when preparing the budget for 2022. With our forecast, just to give you an example, concerning tax receipts and tax revenues, which is below the GDP, the nominal GDP growth projection. And so it is below what one would expect in view of the performance in 2021. And I think that that's the most relevant element of our policy action, which is in times of uncertainty, one needs to be double the prudence in all actions. That has been our guiding principle in the past, and I think it should continue to be our guiding principle going forward, so as to make sure that we reach our targets and we ensure our objectives, even in a more uncertain and maybe less positive macroeconomic scenario. And concerning the outlook, and generally, I am not a particularly optimistic person. I am a person that usually worries a lot about possible risks and uncertainties, and is working always under the preparing for the worst case scenario, but also very determined to make the most of any opportunities. And frankly, I think the Next Generation EU funds and the recovery plan, the Spanish recovery plan, which has a very strong front-loading of investments and reforms, and we have been meeting all the milestones and targets so far and are committed to continuing to meet them in the future. I think this plan provides us with a once-in-a-lifetime, once in our history actually, opportunity to ensure a very different exit from this crisis as compared to the past, and align and orient the new economic cycle that is now starting to make sure that Spain is one of the leading countries in the new digital and green economy, and that we also ensure a fair recovery, one that reduces inequalities and thus a better future for next generations.
Thank you very much. I've been told that we have a few more minutes. If you don't mind, we're going to ask the last question. Okay, so what is the Spanish government, what specific measures is it going to take to promote foreign investment in Spanish companies? Thank you.
Yes, I think I should mention three main elements that are, I think, key. Let me structure them. So I think there are three elements that are important when deciding where to invest, and that makes Spain the most, I think, one of the most attractive countries to invest in right now, other than the quality of life. This has already been mentioned. You know, Spain is one of the best countries to live in. Now, we absolutely want it to continue to be one of the best countries to invest in and to place a business in. First of all, confidence, trust, legal certainty. Spain is a country that provides legal security, also general physical security. It's a safe country. It is a country whose government does what it says. We have, for the past 3.5 years, announcing our economic policy. We have been clear about our objectives, our principles, and what we would be doing, and we have delivered. And I think that this legal certainty, the trust built by the government in this period, and the clear determination and transparency of all our actions should be a first element that should encourage investors to bet for our country. The second reason is this recovery plan. Obviously, Spain, together with Italy, is one of the countries that will receive a largest volume of transfers and loans from the European budget. And this provides us with a unique opportunity to undertake an unprecedented public investment program. We are pressing ahead with these investments, and our aim is to mobilize private investment. And I think I don't need to explain this, because all investors present here today are very aware of our plans, are fully aware of the different programs that are being launched, as well as the determination of the government to bet on public-private partnerships to ensure that we do mobilize this up to 500 billion euros in private investment, and therefore are able to reach our goals in terms of the green and digital transformation, as well as the reinforcement of our social infrastructures. So this is, I think, a second feature that makes Spain quite unique, being also the first country in implementing the European Recovery Plan. We have been the first country to get the plan approved, to get the pre-financing, to get the first payment linked to the delivering of targets, and we are meeting all our targets in terms of the structural reforms. And the second and the third reason I would highlight is that we are putting forward a number of legal reforms that should also be specifically attracting foreign investment in our country, because we are trying to place Spain amongst the most advanced countries in terms of creation and growth of companies, in terms of establishment and attraction of investment and talent in the area of startups, so these very dynamic, digitally based and fast-growing companies. Actually, there is a very flourishing ecosystem, not only in Barcelona and Madrid, but other cities in Spain. And Spain has been one of the countries with the best performance in Europe in 2021 in this area. The new startup law will certainly boost this attractiveness. And thirdly, the review of the bankruptcy law, which when approved, will certainly also align Spain to one of the most advanced countries in terms of company restructuring, and therefore business climate and efficient functioning of our economy in general.
Okay, thank you very much for kindly answering all these questions and for your attendance here at the Spain Investors Day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.